Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
It's great to be here. This is a heavy one we're tackling today.
It is, and I think it gets right to the heart of this background hum of anxiety a lot of us feel about the world. So I want to start by asking you, the listener, a question.
Okay.
It's a question that might pop into your head when you're looking at your paycheck, or maybe when you're standing in the voting booth wondering if it makes a difference.
The day after the election feeling.
Exactly that. You wake up, maybe your party won, maybe it lost, the confetti is gone, the victory speeches are over. But then you look at the price of groceries, the cost of housing, your stagnant wages.
And you realize nothing's really changed.
Nothing fundamental has shifted. Why does it feel like no matter who you vote for, left, right, center, the basic economic reality of your life just stays the same?
It's that feeling of powerlessness, isn't it?
Yeah.
You participate, you do your civic duty, but the game itself feels rigged. The board is set.
That is precisely what we're getting into today. We're looking at a really substantial collection of work. It's called The Condition of Democracy, Volume 1. Neoliberal Politics and Sociological Perspectives.
Quite a mouthful.
It is. It's edited by Jürgen Mackert, Hannah Wolf, and Brian S. Turner. And I'll be honest, the title alone can feel a bit intimidating. It sounds like a dense academic text you'd find buried in a university library.
And to be fair, it is a serious sociological work. It's not a light beach read.
No.
But you have to push past that initial impression. Because once you open it up, you realize it's less of a textbook and more of a set of blueprints.
Blueprints for what?
For how the actual plumbing of our democracy has been systematically rerouted over the last 4 or 5 decades.
And the central question the book poses is both fascinating and, frankly, a little chilling. It asks, how have our democratic institutions been redesigned not to serve the will of the people, but to actively insulate the market from the will of the people?
That's the core of it. We have this story we tell ourselves that democracy and capitalism are two sides of the same coin. Freedom.
That they naturally go together.
Right. But the argument that runs through this entire volume is that, particularly in the neoliberal era, these two systems are fundamentally in conflict. It's a kind of quiet war.
A war where one side seems to have taken the other captive without many people noticing.
Yes. And just to frame our discussion, because this is Crisis in Perception, we need to be very clear about our approach here. We are not here to pass moral judgment on specific politicians or parties.
No, this isn't a left versus right debate show. You can find plenty of those elsewhere.
Our goal is to look at the system itself, the design, the incentives that shape behavior. We're going to look at the plumbing to figure out why the water, which in a democracy is supposed to be power, seems to be flowing in only one direction.
So let's start with that context. The book is volume 1 of a series. What is the specific condition of democracy that the editors are trying to diagnose here?
Well, you can't understand the diagnosis without knowing the patient's history. And the editors, especially Brian S. Turner in the introduction, do a great job of setting the stage. They take us back to that post-World War II period.
The so-called 30 glorious years.
Exactly. From the late 40s through the 70s, and then accelerating after the fall of the Berlin Wall, there's this incredible sense of optimism, a belief that we'd sort of figured it out.
The end of history idea from Francis Fukuyama.
That's the one. The feeling was that liberal democracy combined with market capitalism was the final form of human government. It had won. The book mentions the political theorist John Donne, who noted the irony of the moment, saying, "We're all Democrats today." It felt like the only game in town.
And for a while, it seemed to be working, right? The book talks about the middle-class society that emerged. Prosperity was, at least compared to before the war or what we see now, much more broadly shared.
It was. But then the mood begins to sour. The narrative starts to fray. And according to this volume, the definitive turning point, the moment the mask really slipped, was the global financial crisis of 2008 to 2011.
Why then?
Because that was the moment the promise of the neoliberal remedy was shown to be, well, hollow. This was the idea, dominant since the 80s, that low taxes, deregulation, privatization, and free markets would create a tide that lifts all boats.
And the crash showed that it didn't just not lift all boats, it actually sank quite a few of them while sending a few mega yachts into the stratosphere.
A perfect metaphor. And the data in the book is staggering. Turner points out that in the U.S., between 1979 and 2007, the very years of this neoliberal experiment, the real income of the top 1% quadrupled,
Quadrupled.
while the income for the bottom half stagnated or fell. By 2007, he notes, inequality was right back to the levels we saw just before the Great Depression in 1928.
And yet, when the system broke in 2008, the response wasn't to question that model.
No, it was to double down on it. It was to use public money to save the very institutions that caused the crisis, while imposing austerity on the general population. And this leads us to the book's central thesis.
Which is?
That neoliberalism isn't just an economic theory about efficiency, it's a political project.
A political project. What does that mean?
It means its primary goal isn't economic, it's political. It's about reconfiguring the relationship between the state, the market, and the citizen. And the output of this project, the word you see again and again in this book, is de-democratization.
De-democratization.
It's a clunky word, I know. It sounds like something out of a dystopian novel.
So let's break it down. What does it actually mean? Because, we still have elections. We have parliaments, a Congress, presidents. The buildings are still there.
They are, and that's what makes the process so insidious. De-democratization isn't a military coup. It's not about burning down the parliament building. It's the process of hollowing out those democratic institutions from the inside.
So you keep the facade.
You keep the whole spectacle. The elections happen, politicians give speeches, laws are debated, but the actual power of those institutions to challenge or override fundamental market outcomes has been stripped away.
It's like the steering wheel in a car is still there. You can turn it. It feels like you're driving, but it's been disconnected from the axle.
That is a fantastic analogy. The voters can yank the wheel as hard as they want to the left or to the right, but the car is just going to keep driving down the road that was pre-paved by powerful economic interests.
Okay, that is a huge claim. So we have to get into the how. How do you disconnect the steering wheel without the passengers realizing it? This brings us to the first major insight from the book, which comes from Nancy MacLean's chapter. She introduces a concept called enchaining democracy.
This is a really crucial and, frankly, quite disturbing piece of the puzzle. MacLean's work focuses on a group of thinkers who were incredibly influential, but whose names are not widely known. She centers on a man named James McGill Buchanan.
He won a Nobel Prize in economics, right? So he's not some fringe figure.
Not at all. A Nobel laureate. He was the intellectual architect of what's known as the Virginia School of Political Economy. And the driving force, the core philosophy behind his entire life's work, was a profound and deep-seated suspicion of democracy itself.
Which sounds incredibly counterintuitive, especially for a celebrated American economist. The whole brand is that capitalism and democracy are a package deal.
Well, not if you see the world through Buchanan's lens, for him and his colleagues. Often funded by a network of wealthy corporate donors like Charles Koch, democracy wasn't a partner to capitalism, it was a threat.
A threat to what, specifically?
A threat to property.
Yeah.
To capital. Their core belief was that if you give the majority of the masses too much power through the ballot box, what will they inevitably do?
They'll vote to tax the rich and spend it on services for themselves.
Exactly. They'll use the state to take wealth from the minority of producers and give it to the majority of takers. They had technical terms for it like rent-seeking or majoritarian looting, but that was the basic fear. The mob was coming for their money.
So what was their solution? You can't just get rid of democracy. That would be too obvious.
You can't. So the project of the Virginia School wasn't to destroy government. It was to enchain it, to bind it up. The goal was to redesign the rules of the game, the Constitution itself, to severely restrict what a democratically elected government is legally allowed to do.
Especially when it comes to the economy.
Precisely. They wanted to insulate what they call economic liberty, which is a very specific definition of liberty, really meaning property rights and freedom from taxation, from the reach of voters.
So how do you do that? What do these chains look like in practice?
They look like proposals for constitutional amendments that require a supermajority, say 2/3 or 3/4 of the vote, to raise any taxes. They look like balanced budget amendments that make it impossible for the government to engage in deficit spending for social programs, even in a recession.
It's like putting a governor on a car's engine. The public can be screaming, flooring the gas pedal, demanding action on climate change or healthcare or inequality.
But the engine is mechanically designed to never go above a certain speed. The chains hold it back. The system is designed to produce gridlock when the public demands something that capital doesn't want.
And MacLean makes the point that this isn't just an American phenomenon anymore.
Oh, not at all. She argues it's now a thoroughly transnational project. It may have started with Buchanan in Virginia, but through these highly organized, well-funded networks like the Atlas Network and the Mont Pelerin Society, this ideology of property supremacy has been exported globally.
You see it in the Maastricht Treaty that created the Eurozone, for example, with its strict limits on national deficits.
Absolutely. The goal is always the same: to insulate economic policy from democratic contestation, to lock in a particular set of economic rules and make them untouchable, to make them seem as natural and unchangeable as the laws of physics.
This really changes how you perceive political gridlock. We're taught to see it as a failure of politicians, like, oh, they're just incompetent or they can't compromise.
But from this perspective, gridlock isn't a bug in the system.
It's a feature.
It's the chains working exactly as designed. Because when the government is paralyzed and unable to act, who fills the vacuum?
The market. The default course is whatever the market dictates.
Exactly. And this leads us right into the second major insight, which comes from the sociologist Margaret R. Summers. She explains how this system doesn't just change our laws, it fundamentally changes our morality. It changes how we think about justice itself.
This was the chapter on market justice versus political justice, and I found this section to be, well, profoundly unsettling, because it's not just about economics, it's about the psychology of how we value ourselves and each other.
It is. Summers argues that over the last few decades, we've witnessed a societal shift where the logic of the market has replaced the logic of democracy as our primary source of value.
Okay, let's break that down. What's the difference between political justice and market justice?
In a traditional democratic framework, your rights and your worth come from your status as a citizen, a human being. That's political justice. The idea of one person, one vote. The idea that you have an inherent right to dignity, to a voice, to certain social protections, simply because you exist as part of the body politic.
Regardless of how much money you have.
Precisely. Your worth is intrinsic. But under a system of market justice,
All that goes away.
it's completely inverted. Under market justice, your worth is not intrinsic. It's determined entirely by your performance and value within the marketplace. Wealth isn't just money. It becomes visible proof of your virtue, of your desert.
Desert as in deservingness.
Yes. If you are rich, the logic of market justice dictates that you must be smart, hardworking, efficient, and innovative. You deserve what you have. Your wealth is the proof.
And the flip side of that coin is pretty brutal.
It's absolutely brutal because if you are poor or struggling under market justice, it cannot be because the system is unfair or rigged against you.
It has to be your fault.
It has to be a personal, moral failing. You must be lazy or foolish, or you made bad choices. The system itself is assumed to be a perfect meritocratic sorting mechanism. So if it sorts you to the bottom, that's where you deserve to be.
The book uses a really powerful, concrete example to show this logic in action. It talks about a massive tax rebate Donald Trump received.
It does. Turner references a report about a $72.9 million tax rebate. Now, if you're looking at that through the lens of political or social justice, you might say, wait a minute, that's a loophole. That's fundamentally unfair. We have crumbling schools and people who can't afford medicine, and one billionaire is getting nearly $73 million back from the government.
That seems like a failure of the system.
But through the lens of market justice, it's not a failure at all.
It's the system working perfectly.
It's the system rewarding a savvy capital owner for his efficient management of assets. He earned that rebate by playing the game better than anyone else. The market produced that outcome, therefore the outcome is just. It's validation.
At the very same time, that same system will create a massive bureaucracy to determine if a single mother is deserving of a few $100s in food assistance.
Exactly. It's a feedback loop. The theory of just deserts provides a powerful moral justification for extreme inequality. It reframes what are actually political choices as natural outcomes. It tells the listener, the citizen, don't question the distribution of wealth. It's a reflection of merit. To question it is to question nature itself.
And this infects our culture, doesn't it? It's not just policy. It changes how we think about what kind of work is valuable.
Completely. If the market is the sole arbiter of value, then a hedge fund manager who makes billions is, by definition, more valuable to society than a teacher or a nurse or a caregiver because they are paid less.
Even though a society can't function without teachers and nurses.
It doesn't matter. Their market price is lower, therefore their social worth is lower. And we internalize this. People begin to feel deep shame for poverty and a sense of righteous pride in wealth, regardless of how that poverty was created or that wealth was acquired. It saps the political will for change because we've been taught to believe the outcome is deserved.
You used the word natural just now, the market as a natural force. This is the perfect segue to the third core insight from the book, which for me was the biggest mind bender of all. It's the demolition of the myth of the stateless market.
Yes. This is where we have to introduce the concept of pre-distribution.
Right. And this is so important because usually when we talk about fixing inequality, the entire debate is framed around redistribution.
It is. The whole conversation is the market does its thing. It produces winners and losers, and then we argue about whether the government should step in after the fact to tax the winners a bit more and give some of it to the losers through social programs.
And the standard argument against that is always, that's government interference, you're taking money I earned, it's an unnatural intervention into the free market.
But Summers, building on the foundational work of thinkers like Karl Polanyi, argues that this entire premise is a lie, a foundational myth.
The myth being that there is such a thing as a natural or free market to begin with.
There is no such thing. It doesn't exist. Markets are not forces of nature like gravity or the weather. You don't just stumble upon a fully formed stock market in the middle of the jungle.
They're built, they're engineered.
They are intensely constructed, top to bottom, by laws and regulations. The state doesn't intervene in the market. The state creates the market. The rules of property, contract law, patent law, bankruptcy law, corporate charters, the money supply, these are all government creations. They are the field, the rules, and the referee of the game.
So if redistribution is tweaking the score after the game is over, pre-distribution is about how the rules were written before the first whistle was even blown.
That is the perfect way to put it. Pre-distribution refers to that vast, often invisible, set of legal and institutional frameworks that determine who has power and who gets what, long before any market transaction ever takes place.
Can you give us a concrete example, a pre-distributive law that seems neutral on the surface but is actually tilting the entire playing field?
Labor law is a classic one. The decline of the legal right to unionize and bargain collectively is a massive pre-distributive shift. A century ago, the state actively tilted the field against workers. Then, for a time, it shifted to protect unions. Now, for the last 40 years, laws have been systematically passed to make it harder for workers to organize.
Right to work laws, for example.
Exactly. That's not the free market at work. That is a deliberate political choice, a pre-distributive rule that weakens the bargaining power of labor and strengthens the hand of capital. It rigs the outcome of wage negotiations before they even start.
What about something like bankruptcy law?
A fantastic example. As the book touches on, if a large corporation gets into financial trouble, the bankruptcy code is written to allow it to restructure, shed its debts to workers and suppliers, and continue operating. The law is designed to protect the entity of capital itself.
But if you're an individual, say a student with overwhelming student loan debt.
In the United States, that debt is specifically carved out by law. You generally cannot discharge it in bankruptcy. It will follow you for the rest of your life. That is a pre-distributive choice. The state has decided that the capital of the lender is more important to protect than the human potential of the borrower.
So there's a safety net woven into the legal code for corporations and a trapdoor woven in for students.
Yes, and because all this happens in the obscure language of legal codes and regulatory statutes, in the plumbing of the system, we don't see it as a political act. We just see the struggling student and say, well, they shouldn't have taken out the loan. We apply market justice. We don't say, why did our elected officials write the bankruptcy code this way?
This just completely turns the dominant narrative on its head. The story we hear constantly is government interferes in the free market, but the reality the book presents is the market is government regulation.
The real question is never intervention versus non-intervention. That's a false choice. The real question is always, for whom are the rules being written?
And this brings up a really dark asymmetry in how this system protects itself. We talked about how the poor are blamed for their failures under market justice, but what happens when the rich, the architects of the system, fail? This leads us to insight number 4, the bailout reinforcement loop.
Yes, this is analyzed in the book by authors like Andreas Kellert, especially in the context of the 2008 crisis and the European banking union that followed. And it exposes the central hypocrisy of the entire system.
It's what you could call the moral hazard inversion.
Right. Moral hazard is this classic economic concept. It says that if you protect people from the consequences of their risks, they'll just act more recklessly.
And we hear this argument constantly when it comes to social safety nets. We can't have generous unemployment benefits. It will create moral hazard. People won't look for work.
We can't forgive student debt. It creates moral hazard. People will just take out more loans. It's the ultimate argument for discipline and punishment for the average person.
But then 2008 happens. The largest financial institutions in the world, which had engaged in the most reckless gambling imaginable, are on the verge of collapse.
And did we hear a national debate about the moral hazard of bailing them out?
No, the term vanished from the conversation overnight.
It was replaced by a new one. Systemic importance.
Too big to fail.
Suddenly, the narrative flipped 180 degrees. The argument was that we had to save them, precisely because they were so big and interconnected. Letting them fail would bring down the whole system. So public money, your tax squatter dollars, was funneled by the trillions to protect the private assets of the very people who caused the crisis.
So the feedback loop becomes brutally clear. Step 1. Financial institutions lobby for deregulation. That's the pre-distribution. Step 2. They use that freedom to take on massive profitable risks. Step 3. The risks blow up and they fail.
Step 4. The government, citing systemic importance, bails them out. Step 5. The institutions remain just as powerful, if not more so, and largely unregulated. And the loop begins again.
It's the privatization of profit and the socialization of risk.
It is the ultimate reinforcement of an oligarchy that is fused with the state. The state effectively acts as the insurer of last resort for the wealthy, while simultaneously acting as the harsh disciplinarian of the poor. It perfectly embodies that heads I win, tails you lose logic of market justice.
It's enraging when you map it out that clearly, and it makes you wonder about the people making these decisions, the experts in the room, which is actually the fifth and final core insight we need to cover, the role of expertise and the administrative state.
This is such a critical piece of the de-democratization puzzle, and it's explored by contributors like Stephen Turner. Look, the world we live in is mind-bogglingly complex.
Right.
Managing a modern economy, a global supply chain, or something like the Eurozone banking system, requires deep technical expertise. You can't just put every decision about central bank capital ratios up for a popular vote.
No, I don't want to vote on that. I want someone who knows what they're doing to handle that.
Of course.
Yeah.
But what these authors argue is that we've seen a dangerous politicization of expertise. More and more decisions that are fundamentally political decisions about values, about who gets what, about who bears the costs, have been deliberately moved out of the messy, contested realm of democratic politics.
And into the quiet, closed-door realm of technical expertise.
Decisions are moved from the parliament to the commission, from the elected legislature to the unelected central bank board or the World Trade Organization tribunal.
And who are these experts?
Well, they are technocrats. They are often drawn from the very industries they're supposed to be regulating. Their entire worldview is shaped by the logic of the market. And most importantly, they are not accountable to voters.
So when the public gets angry about the consequences of their decisions, like the austerity imposed on Greece after 2008, who can they vote out?
Nobody. The decision makers at the European Central Bank or the IMF are insulated from democratic accountability. And this creates what the book calls a profound democratic deficit.
And the public isn't stupid. They can feel this.
They feel it deeply. They start to lose faith in experts because they correctly perceive that these experts are not neutral arbiters of truth. They are agents of a particular political and economic status quo. Turner calls this the meltdown of democratic life. When people feel that voting doesn't matter because the real power is held by an unaccountable technocracy, they either check out entirely or they start looking for radical alternatives.
Which is the perfect entry point for populism. But before we get there, I want to hit pause. We've just laid out 5 huge interconnected ideas. Let's do what we do on this show and try to explicitly map the system we've just described. Let's make the machine visible.
Let's do it.
Okay, so if we're drawing a systems map, let's start with the key actors.
At one pole, you have what McLean calls the corporate libertarian right. This is the network of actors like the Koch brothers, the think tanks they fund, the Virginia School academics who provide the intellectual ammunition, and the transnational groups like the Atlas Network that spread these ideas globally.
And their primary incentive is to maximize what they call economic liberty. In plain English, that means minimizing their tax burden and freeing themselves from regulation. Their strategy is to fund a long-term intellectual and political movement to reshape the rules in their favor.
Then you have the state itself. Its incentive has slowly shifted. Instead of its primary goal being, say, social welfare or full employment, its new prime directive is to maintain market confidence and systemic stability. It must keep the markets happy above all else.
And then there's the voter. What's their incentive structure?
It's a trap, really. The voter is left with an incentive either toward apathy, why bother, it doesn't change anything, or toward radicalization. They might embrace a populist who promises to smash the whole system because the moderate incremental path of democratic reform seems completely blocked.
Okay, now let's talk about the narratives. This is the software that runs on the system's hardware. What are the key stories that keep this machine running?
The foundational one is the free market is natural and efficient. Another is government intervention is politicizing the economy, which is a brilliant piece of framing that recasts democratic control as illegitimate interference.
And of course, the big one from the Thatcher era, there is no alternative, or TINA.
Tina. The idea that this is the only possible way to organize society, so don't even try to imagine something different. And a newer one is anti-populism, using the legitimate fear of demagogues as a justification to hand even more power over to the unelected experts to protect the system.
What about the tools, the actual mechanisms used to enforce this?
We've covered them. They are the pre-distributive laws, intellectual property rights, anti-union court rulings, bankruptcy codes written by the financial industry. They are the constitutional constraints, the chains, like balanced budget amendments that lock in policy. And they are the emergency tools, like the concept of systemic importance used to justify bailouts.
And finally, the engine that keeps it all going, the feedback loops.
The primary loop is this. The concentration of wealth leads directly to the concentration of political power through campaign finance, lobbying, and media ownership. That concentrated political power is then used to write new rules, more pre-distribution, that further concentrate wealth.
And the cycle repeats, getting stronger each time.
And the political trap is the secondary loop. When people try to use democracy to fix this, they run into the chains. Their frustration grows, which leads to the rise of anti-democratic populism, which then further discredits the idea of democracy itself, making the rule of experts seem more appealing.
It's a self-reinforcing system. It's incredibly resilient. Which brings us to today. Let's talk about the present-day implications. Why does a book analyzing the fallout of 2008 still feel so urgent right now?
Because the structural continuity is just undeniable. The patterns identified in the book didn't end in 2011. They've continued and in some cases accelerated. Look at the response to the pandemic, for example. Massive asset protection for corporations, temporary and often meager support for individuals.
And then the austerity packages imposed on Southern Europe after 2008.
A perfect example. Those policies, dictated by unelected bodies, destroyed the social fabric of countries like Greece and Spain for a generation. And yet the underlying policy logic persists. The book draws a straight line from that hollowing out of social democracy to the rise of what it calls illiberal democracy.
You're talking about places like Hungary under Viktor Orban or what we saw in Poland.
Exactly. The book's argument is that this new wave of authoritarianism is not some alien force that came from nowhere. It's often a direct reaction to, and sometimes even a partner of, this hollowed-out neoliberalism. When the mainstream liberal democratic system tells its citizens, sorry, the market has decided you lose your job, your pension, and your future, and we are powerless to help, people will eventually look for a strongman who promises to protect them, even if it means giving up their civil liberties.
It creates this really bizarre paradox, the freedom paradox.
Tell me about that.
We have more market choices than any humans in history. You can go online and choose from a million different phone cases, but we have fewer meaningful civic choices. The ability to collectively decide what kind of society we want to live in feels more distant than ever.
And we have to be clear about how this project continues. The book emphasizes the stealth plan nature of it. The networks promoting this ideology, the Koch network, the Atlas network, they operate quietly and patiently.
It's not just about winning the next election.
No, this is a much longer game. It's about funding university professorships to train the next generation of economists and lawyers. It's about developing model legislation that can be handed to friendly politicians. It's about getting their preferred judges appointed to the courts. It's a long march through the institutions.
It's a distributed network, not a single conspiracy. There's no one villain in a volcano lair. It's a shared ideology operating through think tanks, academic departments, and legal societies across the globe.
And it is truly global now. It may have been supercharged in the US and the UK, but as the book shows, these networks are deeply influential in Latin America, Australia, and all across Europe.
Okay, so let's connect all this back to the mission of our channel, to crisis and perception. How does this book, this entire framework, help us see the world differently?
I think its most powerful effect is how it shifts our perception of blame. Our culture is saturated with the narrative of individual responsibility.
Right. If you're poor, it's because you didn't work hard enough. If you're in debt, you made bad choices.
But this entire analysis forces you to shift your perception. It helps you see poverty not primarily as a lack of individual character, but as the predictable output of a system designed through predistribution. The game is rigged from the start.
So the perception shift is realizing that terms like moral hazard are not neutral economic concepts. They are political weapons deployed selectively against the poor and vulnerable, while the wealthy are granted immunity.
And it fundamentally alters how we perceive the market itself. We are trained to see it as a natural, neutral, almost weather-like phenomenon. The market was volatile today, as if it's something that just happens to us.
But this deep dive reveals it's not the weather. It's a highly engineered machine, a political creature, as you said earlier, designed by power for power. And the system's genius is that it's designed to occlude, to hide its own workings. It's engineered to look like nature.
And the entire goal of this channel is to look behind the curtain, to see the engineering behind what is presented as nature.
Because if it's a machine, it's not inevitable. Machines have designers, and they can be redesigned.
That's the crucial and perhaps hopeful implication.
So as we come to a close, let's try to summarize the journey we've been on. This book, The Condition of Democracy, it paints a pretty sobering picture. It tells us that the decay of our democratic power isn't an accident, it's not just neglect. It's a result of a deliberate design to enchain it.
It helps us see that the economy isn't a separate sphere that the state meddles in. The state constructs the economy with every law it passes or repeals. And it reveals that this crisis of democracy we're always hearing about is, at its core, a clash between two fundamentally different forms of justice.
Market justice, which is effectively $1, one vote.
And democratic justice, which is one person, one vote.
And those two systems, those two logics, are in a battle for the soul of our institutions as we speak.
They absolutely are.
So, I want to leave our listener with one final thought to reflect on, a question to carry with you. If this book is right, if the market is not a natural force but an engineered system, then it can be re-engineered. The current chains that bind our democracy were built piece by people for the primary purpose of protecting property.
So the open question for all of us is this. What would a system look like that was built piece by piece to protect and enhance participation?
At the end of the day, what are we? Are we citizens of a democracy, or are we just customers in a marketplace?
That may be the defining question of the 21st century.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.